Welcome, everyone, to the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals podcast series, featuring great discussions, insight, and resources on all things related to education and administration. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Season 4 of the MASSP podcast. My name is Ryan Casey. Joining us today on this episode, we have Mike Kapolka, the principal at Chelsea High School. And Mike is going to be joining us today to talk about a program or initiative they have in their school building on student entrance interviews and senior exit interviews. And I became aware of this because Mike was gracious enough to hop on the MASSP.com forums, and I caught this idea that he shared, and we wanted to have him on the episode. So Mike, thanks for being here today. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Well, I'm excited. As I mentioned, just seeing you mention this on the forums really sparked some interest for me. And I thought it was a really unique way that other listeners and other principals and educators across the state might want to hear about. So can you just kind of just diving right in, how did this idea of doing these mass entrance and exit interviews start at Chelsea High School? I know a lot of people do the exit side, but thinking about both ends of the spectrum here,
Sure.
How did you come across the idea of doing both, with your freshmen as well as with your seniors as they leave?
I will tell you, Ryan, that part of it was a targeted initiative, something that we gave some thought, especially when we're going through kind of the school improvement process. But then also the other part that I'll speak to is we also stumbled into where this, eventually went to. So the targeted piece was our engagement review. So we went through that last year. And this was a unique engagement review in the sense that the folks that came in on the engagement review team through Advanced Ed were individuals that I'd known in my professional workings for multiple years. Either I worked with them when I was at Warren Fitzgerald as a teacher, or they were individuals that I served with on other searches or engagement reviews in other districts. So I asked really specifically, I wanted them to be here because I respected their opinions and I knew they knew me and my leadership style well enough where they would speak directly to the things, potentially initiatives and areas of improvement that we could get better at, and also those exemplars of things that we're doing really well. So come through the process, which was outstanding, and our staff really valued it. And one of the big takeaways that they shared with us was that it was student agency was something that was lacking. We had been trying, or we had tried over the past probably 2 or 3 years to implement student voice into a lot of the practices that we have at Chelsea High School, but it wasn't consistent. And so this then led to some time to digest their information, which then led us into our school improvement process in the summer as we were thinking about goals. And so we created a culture and climate goal at Chelsea High School, really specific for our staff to focus on areas to improve student agency. But it was my reflective professional goal that we create every single year. Each building administrator works on a specific goal. And one of my goals this year was to try to build agency and relationships with students in a way that maybe I hadn't before. And I'll give you an example. So surface level is like most principals and assistant principals, you're attending concerts and athletic contests, and you're dropping into student council meetings, which are great and still part of the job and valuable. But it's another layer that is missing in terms of having really authentic connections with students in a way that when you become an administrator, for those of us that have made that transition from the classroom to being a high school principal or assistant principal, it just feels a little different. Mm-hmm. And so I had heard of other school districts that have done an exit interview. A good friend of mine, Eric McCullough, who is the principal at Manchester, has done senior exit interviews now for about 2 years. And we had talked a little bit about that. And so I thought, gosh, that's a great idea. I'd like to maybe take and build that and try that in a different way of working, not necessarily with individual students, but to do them in small groups so students feel a little more comfortable of sharing information. So I started those at the beginning of the year, and really the questions that I had and that I've asked, and they've evolved a little bit, but really where we started, they were aligned to our culture and climate initiative at our high school to get specific feedback of things through their experience in our high school for 4 years, or even if they came in as a transfer student, what's gone well? What are areas that, again, were exemplars for you as a student that were just great memories? But also it gives them a chance and lends them a voice to really tell me areas that they think that we're missing the mark on. And as you can imagine, high school seniors will let you know if you ask them the question. So those have been really good conversations to have. The flip side of that, though, when I say we stumbled into it a little bit too, was the freshman component. So our assistant principal, Dr. Lumen Strong, and I, we meet with our high school team, but he's part of that. So we meet every Monday morning. And this was probably earlier on into the fall in September. And I was talking about these senior exit interviews, and he was already starting freshman interviews, but really specific to a targeted population of at-risk students, to just try to get them connected in a way with administration that was positive. So the first interaction he would have with those students was positive as opposed to negative if it was student discipline. And the more that we talked about it, we said, wouldn't it be cool if we ended up having almost an entrance and an exit interview? So right now and we shifted at that point. So he is starting to interview, and he's about 50% through with the freshman class. I'm a little past 50% done with our senior class. And so now at the end of the day, in that 4-year experience for our freshmen in the class of 2023, we'll be able to do an exit interview, or entrance interview, which is what he's doing right now. And then in 4 years, when I interview the class of 2023 as seniors, I'll be able to then review those questions that he asked to try to get a pre and a post assessment, if you will, of their experience in the high school.
Oh, that's really cool. What a awesome approach. It seems like you guys, really work well as an admin team too, where you can both cover a lot of ground versus maybe this, might be a little more difficult to tackle, as one person or one administrator to cover, that many students. So it seems a really neat approach that works well for your building.
And that's one of the things, and I appreciate you saying that, Ryan. And for us, you think of, is this sustainable? Is it something you could do at a much larger school? If you think of like a larger Class A school, because Chelsea, on average, is right around 820 students, and we have 820 students in the high school. So if it's a larger school, or if it's a smaller school, I would argue you can probably still come up with a format that works. I started with individual meetings or one-on-one with students, and realized very quickly on that there were a couple things that came up of that. One, it'd be pretty difficult to get through 206 senior interviews if I did it that way. But then the other thing is having a smaller group of students, and right now I'm going with 3 and 4, they're a little more comfortable to share just because you have different voices in the room, and there's a comfortability in sharing maybe a different opinion, especially if I don't have a relationship with a student. It's very difficult sometimes for them just to come right out and say something critical.
Yeah.
So it's nice that gives them a little bit of comfort to have some peers in the room to be able to have those conversations.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you are meeting in small groups. So I guess, although they might not look completely different, can you just walk us through what the actual freshman entrance interview would look like, which I know it sounds like your assistant principal handles?
Sure. So we looked at the questions. He had a copy of my questions. We've catered and altered a little bit the 9th grade questions. So we'll ask, what about the first question we'll ask is, what about the transition to high school has been a positive one for you? And that mirrors, quite frankly, what we do with the senior interview, but it's more encompassing the 4 years in the building of what's been an example, and I use an exemplar, if you will, over the 4 years here. So for freshmen, it's what part of the freshman transition has gone really, really well for you? And then the second follow-up question is, what in that transition has been maybe a stumbling block for you, or something that you feel that we can address for the class of 2024 that's coming in next year that we can make a little bit better. We then ask, is there someone in the building that you've already formed a positive relationship with? So it's trying to find at an early stage of their high school career, is there one person in the building that exists as a staff member, a support staff member, an administrator, or otherwise, that they built a positive relationship with, and someone they feel that they can go to if they have an issue that maybe they would like to share. And then we talk about their level of involvement. It's one of the questions we ask is, okay, we know that one of the greatest predictors of future success in high school would basically be the involvement that they have in a club, a sport, an extracurricular club, if you will. And it also gives us a chance, and gives Dr. Strong a chance to say, well, if you're not, here's some things to think of. And then that way we're able to then identify students that maybe are not connected. And then because we have 28 clubs at Chelsea High School, 30 varsity sports, there are several avenues for students to get involved. It gives us a chance to then identify them. And we have a student support team that we can have these conversations with, but it gives us a way to connect those students in a way that otherwise they weren't connected before.
Absolutely. Great questions, especially about that, is there somebody on staff that you have a positive rapport with? That's just, a lot of powerful question and opportunities for feedback there. So if we flip this now, we know what you're doing with the freshmen is basically then the senior interviews fairly mirrored, maybe just the questions differing a little bit, or what does that process look like then?
The questions are pretty similar. They're geared more towards the lens of now that your experience is coming to an end. How has it been? What through your experience would you do differently? The one question that was really targeted because we start scheduling relatively early in Chelsea for the 2021 school year, and so one of the questions that I asked them, and it's probably my favorite question to ask because it's a reflective question, is if I were to call you up 10 years from now, and I were to ask you what would be one piece of advice that you would give to your 8th grade self or an 8th grade incoming student, and switch the question up one or two different ways, what would that one piece of advice be? And the reason why I asked the question, and I'm doing it now, is I was able to take those answers from students, our seniors, and share those not only with their 8th grade students when we went to our middle school to do scheduling, but also when I do my 8th grade parent meeting that most schools do. So I had parents in the auditorium, and I'm able to share, hey, we were doing these senior interviews. We're also doing these freshman interviews. So your students will go through this next year. But this isn't perspective from myself as a building level administrator with multiple years of students that have lived the experience at Chelsea High School of really what you should think about and focus on. And it's been reaffirming in some areas and eye-opening in others, where reaffirming students have said, get involved. And that's great to hear because I've felt that forever, but you just never quite know unless you ask the question to students. But then the flip side of it is students and our seniors have shared things along the lines of, I wish I would have, focused more on my academics in 9th grade year. Some students have said that, where they hear time and time again from obviously their parents and teachers and whatnot, that first step into high school is very important for you to have that strong foundational academic start. But then we've had other students that have come in and they've shared that you don't have to have it all figured out. That's been kind of the second most consistent answer, is that it's okay for you to not know what you want to do in 9th grade. That's what high school is about, is for you to have access to this comprehensive high school model. At least in our high school, that's what it looks like, is they can hone in their area of focus or expertise or things that they're passionate about over their 4-year existence in the high school. Is they don't necessarily have to figure that out coming into 9th grade. And so it's been empowering. It's been a lot of fun, quite frankly, to be able to share those experiences with their 8th grade students. And then more than anything, just the interviews are the best part of my day.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure you do. It's a lot of work, but especially based on the feedback that you're getting, I bet you it is very not just eye-opening, but rewarding as well. And I just got to say thank you for taking the time to gather feedback. I actually just did a session at our AP and Dean Summit the other week on getting surveys out and collecting feedback to improve your building culture. And whether I did it as a teacher, assistant principal, or principal, I always said, I know a lot of people scoff at the notion of letting students sometimes give you feedback, or they just assume that students are going to be uninterested or give you kind of just one-off answers or just not take it seriously. And I always found the exact opposite. Like, if you give students a voice and give them a chance to give you feedback, and you show them that you're taking it seriously and you value their time and you value their voice, they give you really, really good answers that will improve your classroom or your building or your program or whatever it is you're trying to get feedback on. So I'm sure you have found the same.
I couldn't agree with you more. And just in those, one of the questions that I ask, and this has been another consistent key, piece of feedback the students have given me, is I ask one of the questions to them is, if you were a superintendent and you were starting your own school, what would you do to, ensure a success of this new building? What one thing, either tangible or otherwise, would you take with you from Chelsea High School to then transplant into your new school? So they've talked about staff. Staff's been the number one answer, which is great feedback, and it's pretty empowering for me to be able to share that with my staff as well, because you're never really going to ask that question, but when you do ask it, it's great feedback to have. The flip side of that, which is the great piece, is when I say, okay, what's the area that we're missing? And when they're sharing these different responses, one area that's come up time and time again, and they've said their experiences like this. It's having the opportunity to really share what we feel, what we've gone through, areas that maybe we think can be addressed because they haven't been asked before. And to me, that was eye-opening. And then I also kick myself a little bit and go, why haven't I done this sooner?
Yeah.
And it's part of it is I know it's prioritizing, trying to find time in your schedule to do that. And one thing I need to give a shout out to my administrative assistant, Gretchen Steele, is she's outstanding in keeping me on track with these meetings. So she will schedule these out and put them as a Google reminder in my calendar that I have to accept, that I can't plan around. And so then next thing you know, they pop up my schedule for the next day, and she's able to carve those out. And I would say without that, I certainly would not be able to get through as many as I have been. And I'm on pace at this point to still get through all of our students by the end of April, which was the goal to begin with.
That's a great advice, by the way. Just like, observations and things like that. Like you have to, if you don't put this on your calendar and make specific times, I would imagine it's just one of those things that would always get pushed back. I'll get caught up. I'll just do twice as many interviews next week.
I'll get to it later.
Yeah. And
Sure.
so, and then before you know it, it's April and you've only done about 5% of your class. So that's, that's great advice. So when we're looking at feedback, we know kids are giving us really valuable stuff here. What does the process for reviewing that feedback look like? And what have the results told you so far?
So this is kind of catered because when I started this process, it was really, I was thinking selfishly of, okay, my professional goal and things that I wanted to focus on. And then it evolved from there of going, my gosh, we can use this as our part of our school improvement process and direct feedback from students. And so I've been utilizing just kind of a word cloud format. And so when I'm asking questions, students, even though it's more narrative in nature, their responses, a lot of them, when I'm asking those questions, I first ask for choose one word or one experience. So what I'm able to do is then take that and to place it into word cloud format. So with the repetition of answers, I can see which responses kind of pop. And so I've been tracking that and been able to share that actually with staff and with parents, as a matter of fact, of just, you have a nice visual representation to show here's the question, but also here are the most frequent responses based upon a word cloud. So then you have those words that are a little bit larger, a little bit brighter in font, if you will, that actually show, okay, what's an example of something that's been a good experience for you here at Chelsea High School, or what's one area that you believe that we need to improve upon. So some of those things that have popped, I've already shared a few of them, were they feel like the staff here is just phenomenal. And they feel very connected with our staff over 4 years. There's at least someone in this building that they're connected with, which is great to know. Areas that they feel like we can improve upon. Part of that would be having students, giving students or lending them voice in the process of, for example, like student council. I just met with them this morning about lights at dances. It's the age old, right? How many lights are too many or too few at a high school dance? And so giving them an opportunity to have really direct and authentic feedback, it really has been another area that has come to light as well. And then probably I would say the last one that's been the most consistent is that students have valued some of the culture and climate initiatives that we've tried to initiate and instill here at Chelsea High School. And so the one in particular is our Why You Matter campaign that we've now had for 4 years. And it's one of those things where you implement it, you believe that it's going really well, but you're never quite sure. Yeah. And so that has come up time and time again in the interviews with our seniors, is that they love our speaker series. They love that there's a theme every single year. And there's been this consistency, not only in the high school, but we've brought that down to our middle school and our other elementaries. So they're doing leveled activities with their students when we have our Why You Matter campaign kickoff, which every year has a different theme, but really it started with a mental health focus, an empowerment focus for our students, just to make sure that they understand that they're cared for, they're supported, and we love them. But every year is a little bit different. But that's also one that's come up time and time again that they really value.
Very cool. So for people listening to the podcast right now, if they're thinking, man, I really want to do this, is this something that can be easily replicated? You and I already mentioned that maybe the approach might have to change depending on the size of the building you're in and the size of your admin team. But for those that do want to try this, what advice would you give them before they get started or as they get started?
That's a great question, Ryan. I would say the first piece of advice I would give to them is just to come up with a format that they feel might work for them. If you're at a high school that maybe has less students than we do, you probably could get through one-on-one individual interviews with your seniors. That may work for you. If you're at a much larger high school, I think I'm from Macomb County originally, and think of like Dakota and Chippewa Valley are just large high schools. You probably could do more of a small, almost a controlled group of 5, 6, 7 students at a time, and then be able to delegate that a little bit with your administrative team, but really come up with a schedule. And so when we started this, quite frankly, in the summer, and we knew that we were going to roll it out, I sat down with Gretchen, my administrative assistant, and we looked at the calendar. We knew, okay, this is when scheduling pops up, and this is when I usually will get busy with teacher evaluations. And she knows my schedule well enough, and I know my schedule well enough to say, okay, here's where we're going to hit these even harder this month, because I think I'm going to have a little more time. And really the next step is having somebody to hold you accountable to that. So not only is it Gretchen, it's Dr. Strong is my assistant principal working through the 9th grade. You kind of have an accountability partner. It's a motivating factor to then check in. How far are you with the 9th grade class? And then I'll ask me, how far are you with the senior class? Mm-hmm. And it's great to be able to have those conversations, because that is also helpful to keep moving along. Because I think, to your point, and you stated this before, Ryan, it's pretty easy in your schedule to all of a sudden find something else to plug in that gap if, again, you're not adhering to staying on schedule and trying to get through these interviews.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, I just want to say thank you for just a wonderful opportunity you're giving your students, first and foremost, to give you feedback, and for hopping on the podcast. I know you're a busy man, so thank you very much. And Mike has been gracious enough that we're going to actually, when we go to post this episode, both on MASSP.com website and on social media, so make sure you're following at MASSP. We will include links to some of the sample senior and freshman interview questions they ask. So if you are interested to get an idea of what types of questions they're asking, more than just what Mike shared with us just now, we will put links to those items online. So again, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. And for everybody listening, if you want to learn more or reach out to Mike or see the great things Chelsea High School is doing, you can follow them on Twitter at Chelsea_HS, or follow Mike at Michael, that's Michael J. Kapolka, Kapolka, and reach out to them. I'm sure they would be glad to assist. Again, thank you for listening. We are almost done with season 4 of the MASSP podcast. Don't forget, you can also check out other great resources at MASSP.com and on our YouTube page. Go ahead and sign up and subscribe to be alerted to podcasts, Tech Bite videos, screencasts, and more. Thanks for listening, everybody, and have a great day.